Please be seated. So, most of us, maybe even all of us at one time or another in our lives, have thought that we were on top of the world, that we could solve anything, that we had the answer for it, we could control whatever we're faced with. Because maybe it came from the fact that you were feeling so wonderful because the first day on your job, or the first kiss that you've ever had, or the first award you've ever gotten, or you experienced an intimate moment with Christ on a retreat weekend, or maybe you experienced that intimate moment with your family, your parent, your mother or your father, or maybe a sister or a brother. Maybe it even occurred maybe when you caught that first fish with your grandpa, maybe. We call these mountaintop experiences. And the truth is we hate to come down off that mountain, don't we? Well, before he was a NASA astronaut, and before he led the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission that went around the back of the moon and then came back but was unable to land, Jim Lovell had his own mountaintop experience, his own time of darkness where he felt alone. You see, Jim Lovell was a Navy fighter pilot, and on a midnight training mission on a moonless night, he lost his navigation systems, and he could not find his way back to the USS Shangri-La. And he contemplated what he was going to do. And something within him told him to turn out all of his lights in his aircraft so that he could become accustomed to the darkness without things clouding his ability to see. And so he's there flying at 30-some thousand feet, not knowing where his home was, not knowing how he would get down, and he is scanning the sea, and he eventually sees a glow out in the distance. And so, since that's the only thing he could see, he of course went towards that. And as he got closer, he saw that he had seen bioluminescence brought up by the crustaceans and the shrimps and the sea worms that had that chemical that emitted light that had been torn up by the wake of the aircraft carrier. And so he followed that glow to a safe and healthy landing on the USS Shangri-La. Sort of like Hansel and Gretel following the breadcrumbs. Lovell followed that bioluminescence to safety. And for Lovell, who was raised an Episcopalian, he called it one of many mountaintop experiences in his life. And if you grew up east of the Rockies, which my guess is most of us here did, you will probably recall those days maybe as a child, maybe as a parent with your child, and hopefully maybe even as a parent now, maybe without your children, going out in those times during the year that the fireflies are around and capturing them in your hand and then looking at them as their lights go on and off. They glow and then they dim, they glow and they dim. Because fireflies also have that chemistry, that chemical that allows their bodies to emit this thing called bioluminescence. Today is Transfiguration Sunday, the day we remember when Jesus ascended to a mountaintop and his divine nature was revealed to Peter, James, and John, not only through his skin becoming radiant white, but from also the words that they heard from heaven, similar to the words that we hear at baptism. He is my beloved, listen to him. In spite of the fact that Peter wants to build a tent and worship and savor the moment, Jesus leads them down into the valley. And if you think about it, what a perfect story a perfect passage for our transition from Epiphany into Lent. For we hear who God has called Jesus to be, and Jesus now takes his disciples down into the valley, the same valley that Jesus will start his walk to the cross this Wednesday as we enter Lent and receive our ashes, reminding us that we are dust. We must remember that Jesus, the same Jesus who leads us to those spiritual high places, is also the one who leads us to care for the hurting, the marginalized, those who are suffering and broken in the world. And he does that here in the valleys of real life, the valleys of where life happens. But the most important part is that when we experience those mountaintop moments, we need to remember the valleys. We need to remember that the valleys exist, and that's where we live. When you experience the mountaintop, don't forget the valley below. Because Jesus is there in that valley. Jesus is there in that foul-smelling nursing home. Jesus is there in the valley of fears and tears of the lonely, in the valley of the aching spirit of the shut-ins. And Jesus is also there at the repeated failures of his followers. But also, as I told the children, we need the mountaintop. Peter needed the mountaintop. We need the mountaintop because it's a starting place. It's a starting place of something new. It's always a starting place of something new when we go up on the mountaintop. We need that bioluminescence, if you will. Let me use that example. For it's in that space that we learn to listen to Jesus. We have all had those moments when we learned we needed to listen to Jesus. Now let me tell you and let you in on a little secret. Peter did not go up to the mountaintop to find God. God brought Peter up to the mountaintop. And God revealed God's self to Peter. We don't find God up on the mountains. God finds us. Just like God found Lovell in that broken jet and in that broken capsule out in space. In the book Unconditional Love, Father John Powell tells the story about the resident atheist in his class. His name was Tommy. And at the end of the class, Tommy, in a rather cynical way, comes up to Father Powell and asks him if he thinks he'll ever find God. And Father Powell, reminiscing over the past 13, 14 weeks, decided to shock him a little and say, "No, I don't think so." And you can imagine Tommy's response was sort of, "Oh." Story goes that he turned around and started to walk out the door. And right before he got out the door, Father Powell said, "Tommy, I don't believe that you'll find God, but I am certain that God will find you." So a few years later, Tommy, who had received a diagnosis of a terminal illness, was trying to to wrap everything up, to wrap his mind and his spirit and his soul around this. And he decided that he needed to go see Father Powell. And so he went to see Father Powell and he said, "Father, I wanted to share with you that 2 things you said to me in this class have changed my life. One is that you said that God will find me, not the other way around. And that the other is that the essential sadness is to go through life without living." And Father Powell, I have taken that to heart. And I have expanded that a little bit to say that it is also just as sad to live a life without telling those who you've loved that you love them. And so I decided to take on my hardest case first and talk to my dad. And then he shared the story about how he went in and talked to his dad one night, and his dad was sitting in his normal chair with his paper up covering his eyes, and he said, "Dad, I want to talk to you. I have something to say to you." And his dad didn't move and did the typical humph. And Tommy said, "Dad, I really want to talk to you." And Tommy's dad drops the paper just enough for his eyes to be seen over the top of the paper. And he says, "Dad, I want to share with you that I love you." And the story is that Tommy's dad let the newspaper flutter to the ground. And Tommy says, at that time, I saw two things that I'd never seen in my dad before. And the first is that he cried. And the second is that he hugged me. And that those two things were so good for me, to see him cry, to see that hug, and to share that love that had never been shared. And you know what? It's just like you said. One day I turned around and God was there. God found me. You were right. God found me even when I stopped looking. On the Mount of the Transfiguration, God reveals to us. God finds us. God reveals to us God's plan. And it is just this simple and is this just straightforward. God's plan is, it's found in Jesus. Right? We are to listen to him. Have you come to a place in your life where you have listened or are finally ready to listen? Are you at a place that you see the light of Christ in the world's churning bioluminescence, in the bright shining fireflies of life? Listen to his parables. Listen to his teachings. Watch his miracles. Feel his sacrificial love. And if you haven't, you need to go up. Follow the radiant glow, that radiant glow of Christ's bioluminescence, and experience the mountaintop.